settlements. Let's bring in that noted defense attorney, the Harvard law professor. You see him on Newsmax TV hosting You and the Law. He also blogs for Newsmax, and he's the author of the new book, Taking the Stand, My Life in the Law. He is Alan Dershowitz. Alan, welcome back to America's Forum.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be on with you.
Alan, obviously, Rick Santorum ran for president last time. He wants to run for president again. Is he exaggerating the situation in Israel, or are a lot of people biting their tongues publicly when it comes to the reaction and the interaction with President Obama and Secretary of State Kerry?
Well, I certainly appreciate Rick Santorum's concern for Israel. He is a very strong supporter of Israel. I admire that. He went to Israel, and I'm loath to criticize him. He actually may be right in describing what many Israelis believe, but I think the Israelis who believe that are wrong. I think that John Kerry, who I've known for more than 30 years, and President Obama, who I've also known for a long period of time, are clearly on Israel's side when it comes to security. Now, they're not on Israel's side when it comes to the settlements, but by the way, I'm not sure I am either. So there are areas of disagreement. When it comes to security, I think both the President and the Secretary of State, and most important, the American people, are on Israel's side. They know that Israel is fighting a war of self-defense, that Hamas has put tunnels underground near kindergartens and schools to try to kill as many Israelis as possible, and they put the entrances to the tunnels in mosques and hospitals and schools so that Israel can't blow them up without endangering civilians. We all understand that, but I think the United States and Israel are on the same page when it comes to security. And by the way, my witness for that is no one other than Benjamin Netanyahu, who's also a very close friend of mine, with whom I had dinner just a few weeks ago when I was in Israel. And he, at least at that time, was talking about how strong the security ties between Israel and the United States are. Look, there are some disagreements. I don't agree with the United States withholding some rockets during the middle of this war. That was a serious mistake. I don't agree with Secretary of State Kerry when he tried to bring Qatar into the negotiations over a ceasefire. But I think he's a man of goodwill. I think the president has goodwill toward Israel. I think both agree that Hamas should not be recognized at this point. And, we are friends and allies, the United States and Israel, and we ought to recognize the difference between friends who disagree and people who are on different sides of issues. So I would say that the United States and Israel are friends who disagree rather than being on different sides of the fundamental issues of Israel's security.
Updating the crisis now, of course, ceasefire talks broke down yesterday. Israel calling back its negotiators. This move coming hours after militants, terrorists if you will, launched rockets into Israel from Gaza. Let us bring in another guest, Walid Phares, Middle East expert, author of the book, The Lost Spring, U.S. Policy in the Middle East and Catastrophes to Avoid. Walid, we welcome you in. You've heard part of the conversation with Alan Dershowitz. Bring us up to date on what you understand to be the situation now between Israel and Hamas as you Skype in from Washington this morning.
Good morning, Congressman. Yes, indeed. The problem has been and will continue to be the fact that between the two partners for peace, that would be the Palestinian Authority and Israel, you have a third party. That is Hamas, which is an ally to Hezbollah and to Iran and to the Assad regime, and has no interest to establish a peace treaty. They cannot survive a peace treaty, because if they do, then they will have to be disarmed and there will be real democratic elections, and they are afraid of losing the Iranian support. So unfortunately, what I project is that at every opportunity Hamas has, it will try to regain that cycle of violence with the Israelis so that it will be seen by the radicals in the region as the hero fighting the Zionists and this whole narrative.
Well, as we take a look at different images coming from the Middle East, from another location, images that most of us would like to just absolutely remove from our collective mind, that is what has transpired with the beheading by ISIS of an American photojournalist. Alan, when you heard the news and maybe saw the video or the still shots, what was your reaction?
Well, I was not surprised. I was actually surprised ISIS took so long to use this hostage tactic of threatening to kill Americans, threatening to kill captured Christians, women, children. That's the way ISIS conducts business. By the way, Hamas The only difference between Hamas and ISIS is the Israel Defense Forces. If not for the Israel Defense Forces, Hamas would be doing exactly what ISIS is doing. It would be beheading people. Even during the recent war, it shot Fatah people who were supposed to be under house arrest and who left their houses. They were shot in the knees. They had their arms broken. Previously, they were murdered, thrown off roofs. So people should not distinguish between Hamas and ISIS when it comes to the means they are prepared to use. It's of great concern because ISIS's ultimate goal is to come to the United States, and we now hear reports that the person who beheaded the American may have been an English citizen, so he's traveling with a European passport. He can come into the United States and bring terrorism here. That's the great fear of ISIS, that it has recruited many Europeans, and those people will have a much easier time doing harm to the United States, both in the United States itself and abroad.
Walid, let me turn to you because you monitor relationships between and among the Arab nations. Now with the rise of ISIS, an organization that even Al-Qaeda has stepped away from, are we seeing collective distancing from Arab nations, or are we still seeing financing of ISIS by those Arab nations?
Whomever financed ISIS when it was an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, by the way, and they were regular jihadists fighting in Syria, whomever sent those petrodollars from the Gulf now realize that ISIS has become like a monster of Frankenstein. It is going to go after them. Then you see that Qatar and the Saudis and others are very nervous about it. They're calling even on Pakistani and Egyptian troops to defend that border. But now we have a new era. ISIS at this point in time is prepared to fight even against the United States. Look at the facts. They have captured this journalist 2 years ago, and they have captured others. Why would they do so? Because they knew at one point they're going to clash with the United States and they're going to revert to the Al-Qaeda method. These are not ISIS methods. These have begun with Al-Qaeda 10 years ago. ISIS is a mutation of Al-Qaeda. It's all one global jihadist movement. And what concerns me, as you mentioned, it was mentioned in the discussion, that many of ISIS members are European citizens. Some, according to our national security agencies, are American citizens, and they speak English. So you're going to project that ISIS will eventually send those cells and those individuals or activate those who are already here in the United States.
Alan Dershowitz, a couple of minutes ago, you said that in essence Hamas would be ISIS were it not for Israeli Defense Forces taking the actions that it has taken against ISIS. Now with what we are seeing, do you believe American public opinion will change, not so much in terms of boots on the ground and that kind of American involvement, but do you believe President Obama, as our commander-in-chief, will engage in a far more assertive type of action, more air attacks, perhaps covert actions against these terror groups?
Well, I hope so. I think it should have happened earlier, and I also think it's going to change some of the dimensions of the Middle East peace process. I think the Palestinian Authority will now ask Israel to maintain a security border that is more protective of the Palestinian Authority because they're afraid of ISIS. Jordan is afraid of ISIS. And the Israeli military may play a much more positive role, particularly if there can be peace between Israel and the Palestinians, which I've hoped for a long time. But if that could happen, if Israel could make peace with the Palestinian Authority, and this is a very propitious time to do it, it could form alliances with some of the moderate Arab states, Jordan, Palestine, if it becomes a state, Saudi Arabia, some others, in standing tall against ISIS, because the Israeli military can really handle ISIS much more effectively than, for example, the Iraqi military, whose side we don't even really know it's on. It's really today a wholly owned subsidiary of Iran.
Alan's given us what I would call in this difficult situation the best case scenario. 1 minute remains, Walid. What's the worst case? Continued inaction, what we're seeing right now?
Yes, indeed. If we do not widen the action, and action is not just airstrikes, and it's not necessarily boots on the ground, it's finding the right partners, supporting the Kurds, supporting the minorities, making sure that we have moderates in Baghdad, not pro-Iranians, and bringing all these into one alliance, making sure that Israel and the moderate Palestinians are coming together, fixing our relationship with Egypt that has a significant military that can fight again. So we need a whole new architecture here in Washington.
We'll have to leave it there, gentlemen. We thank you for your time. Walid Phares, Skyping in from Washington, D.C., Alan Dershowitz via telephone from Boston, Massachusetts. Our thanks to you both.
Thank you so much.
Now, we need your take. What do you think is going to transpire with the beheading of an American by ISIS? Why don't you tweet me your comments at Newsmax TV, #America's Forum. We'll be right back.